Windvanes and autopilots are pretty essential for any owner who intends voyaging for more than just a few hours, unless they have a very large crew, or, well, a lot of crew. Basically, there are two types and they have slightly different functions. The electric autopilot will take the helm and follow a plotter-charted course, but it's dependent on electric power, amps, to run the fairly large electric motor. It becomes less efficient as the weather and sea conditions deteriorate. The Windvane will happily steer 24/7 for weeks or months and requires no electric power at all. It'll hold the boat on a course relative to the wind, so that if the wind shifts, you need to adjust the vane and get the boat back on course. It will become even more efficient as the weather deteriorates. But of course, it's not just as simple as that. Windvanes, originally, back in the day, were designed for tiller-steered yachts and were mainly servo-pendulum. The wind blowing on the windvane alone is not strong enough to push or pull the tiller or wheel, turning the rudder to get the boat back on course. So the windvane is connected to a sort of baby rudder in the water, which in turn is connected to the tiller or wheel by non-stretch lines and sometimes a short length of chain. The windvane transmits twisting force to a baby rudder, and the sea going across the rudder angles it away from midships. It is the boat's own main rudder that then is turned in order to bring the boat back onto its course. There is a different system used by hydrovane, which works as shown in this old video of mine. Shortly after shooting this video, I sailed over 30,000 miles around the world with this particular windvane.
This is the wind self-steering gear, the hydrovane. You get her steering on the course you want her to go, you get the sails set so that she's properly balanced, you then set up the hydrovane so the vane is upright, and as she comes off the wind, as she changes direction, the vane leans over to one side or to the other side, and that turns the little baby rudder on the stern here, and that brings Bambola back up into her true course relative to the wind. The wonderful thing about the hydrovane is that the windier it gets, the worse the conditions get, the better it works. The stronger the wind is, therefore the more pressure it exerts on the vane here, and the more pressure that exerts on the rudder, and the quicker she comes back onto the course and the steadier course you steer. If you're going to cross oceans, this is an absolutely essential piece of kit.
So, it's the hydrovane's big rudder that actually steers the boat. There are issues with this system, which requires the fairly large and quite heavy rudder being in the water below the large windvane. The windvane simply leans over and turns the rudder. The boat's main rudder is locked amidships, and there are no lines or pulleys back to the wheel or tiller. You control the direction of the vane by pulling an endless line or twisting a knob, and that's similar to how you set up the windvane on a servo pendulum type windvane. The downsides of the hydrovane system is that having to move the quite heavy rudder when you're in port or anchored for long periods is a bit onto the quay or pontoon in a marina. It's quite heavy or fiddly, but if you're just stopping briefly, you can just put a pin in it and lock it midships so that it doesn't have any effect on the main rudder, or less effect. Generally, the servo pendulum types will fold up out of the water, and anyway are much smaller and lighter as they don't steer the boat. They simply transfer the power of the sea to the boat's main rudder. All Windveer self-steering gear is not even slightly plug and play. You don't just push a switch and it all works. It's fairly time-consuming. First, you need to put the boat sailing on the desired course. With both systems, you have the rudder in the water. You need to get the boat sailing in a balanced way. The sails adjusted to the angle of the wind so that you could briefly let go of the tiller or wheel and the boat wouldn't immediately go off course. Then you adjust the angle of the windvane so its leading edge is feathering into the wind, and then you connect the lines to the main steering, or with the hydrovane you lock the wheel or tiller. Then, as she settles down, you can look at the compass and you can tweak the wind vane so the boat is sailing on the course that you want. And that's a gradual trial and error process, which might include altering the setting of the sail positions. All this might take 10 minutes or so, but like many things, it's hardest the first time you do it. And anyway, 10 minutes is nothing if you're off on a long voyage. You should be aware that whilst the wind vane will continue to work without any problem, however much the wind increases or decreases, if the direction of the wind changes, then the boat's course will change. And if you don't watch the compass, you won't necessarily be aware of it. It takes a while for you to get your head around which way to adjust the vane in order to set the course you want. And some people find it all too complicated and demanding. I had one transatlantic crew who never cracked it and preferred to steer during their watch for the entire 4 hours. I recently met a skipper who had purchased a boat with a hydrovane already on it. He had 3 crew, and both ways across the Atlantic, all the crew hand-steered for their 3-hour watches without problem, rather than use the wind vane. On the other hand, Vincent and Marika, French sailing friends of mine, have only the hydrovane, and they put it into operation the moment they've cleared the port or marina, and they say it only takes a moment. It's worth noting that there is a fitting on the hydrovane which allows the installation of a tiller pilot, so the boat can be steered electronically when there's no wind by using the hydrovane's rudder. The wonderful Jester Challenge is for single-handed boats up to 28 foot racing to the USA or to the Azores. All of these have wind vanes as their primary course-keeping machines. There are lots of wind vanes that come at half the price of hydrovanes, and most of the Jester Challenge boats use one of these. Electric autopilots have become more attractive for long-distance sailing because the larger your boat, the easier it is to generate more amps to run an autopilot. Smaller boats just wanted to have something to take the helm for a while, fixed to the tiller or the wheel, have a large choice of products, all of which are suitable for sailing in reasonable conditions. The first autopilot with its built-in compass for course keeping was, I think, an Autohelm, a British South Coast company who created this brilliant device and was sadly for us taken over by Raymarine. It was simple to install and fitted via a pin into the tiller. You set the compass heading and off you went. The electric ram pushed or pulled the tiller to keep the boat on course, and similar sorts of them are still around today. As the average boat size got bigger, more of them were steered by wheels rather than by tillers, so the ram, the push-pull part of the autopilot system, was moved below deck to where the quadrant is attached to the rudder stock. The same ram system pushed or pulled the quadrant, pulling the rudder round. It became possible to have much more powerful motors and sometimes hydraulics rather than electric motors even. The electronic compass for keeping the boat on course is normally an electronic heading device, often near the chart table or under the chart table. The electronic controls are in the cockpit, from where the ram can be controlled. They are a powerful and efficient way of steering your boat. There are a few circumstances where it's impossible to fit the ram to the quadrant, as in my Beneteau 323, which has the quadrant just inches below the cockpit floor, astern of the wheel, and partly exposed to the elements. In this case, the only alternative to the ram on the quadrant is to have a small electric motor attached to the wheel. It's not very efficient, and it's certainly not man enough for passengers of more than a day or so. See my video about the Raymarine Evolution 100, expensive marine failures, which demonstrates just how flimsy this product actually is. It's only going to work in relatively calm conditions. It's a pretty lightweight, fragile bit of kit, and certainly not suitable for Atlantic crossings. The Only other direct wheel steering I know of is the American CPT Autopilot, which is a very powerful and excellent piece of kit. CPTs have been fitted to thousands of boats in the USA and worldwide. Each one's custom made, so to order one you fill out a measurement form and email it to them, and then they ship the bespoke pilot to you. If you want to cross oceans, or even just Biscay, with an electric autopilot, you need high-powered, reliable, quality kit, not the cheapest available from your online chandlers. The big downside of electric autopilots is they need a lot of amps to work, and they can and will go wrong. Coming from Madeira once, heading for Tangier, I had a very light contrary winds and I needed to motor sail. When the electric autopilot failed terminally, I had to helm for 2 days and nights, taking very short naps with the wind pilot trying to hold her on course for a short time. I was in my 50s, so it wasn't a big problem. But today, I'm not so sure. Whilst I have little interest in racing, it's worth looking at how blue water race boats equip themselves for steering, as clearly solo racing sailors simply cannot stay awake day and night, and an autopilot must steer their vessels. If you look at long-distance racing boats like the sort of Mean Machines, Pip Hare's skippers, none of them have wind vanes. High-tech racers like the boats in the Friends Transat race from Europe to the Caribbean and back, and the Vendée Globe boats rely totally on powerful electronic autopilots integrated into the navigation system. If you look at the high-quality 50-foot plus sailing boats crossing the Atlantic with the Ark, almost none of them have wind vanes. What these larger boats have are diesel generators and seriously large battery banks. Some have solar panels, but the power needed to generate the amps really comes from the generator. I think any boat with a quality Ram-type autopilot with a generator or a main engine with an oversized alternator and extended battery bank can easily make an Atlantic crossing. Mind you, if it's just a couple, I think you should have a full set of spares, ideally a complete second system in its box as a backup, and you need to be confident of your ability to replace any part of the system at sea yourself. Extended battery banks quite simply make it easier to charge batteries as well as their storage capacity. Whatever the size of the battery bank, the last 20% is very hard work to charge. An electric autopilot is going to be turning the wheel constantly, day and night, for 20-odd days if you're going across the Atlantic. It's going to need a vast quantity of DC electricity to do this, so the more you have stored, the less you need to run either the engine or the generator. Except under amazing conditions and with a vast area of solar panels, you're not going to generate enough amps by the sun to constantly run the autopilot, GPS, AIS, navigation lights, the plotter, and occasionally the radar as well. But for most of us, just local cruising, with the occasional overnight, then the basic house battery and engine start battery should be fine. You'll be running the engine to enter and leave port or anchorage, and its alternator will put amps into the battery. In truth, every boat without a large crew will need an electric autopilot for even just a day's sails, in addition to a wind vane. Now, there are a range of wind vane self-steering gears available at a range of prices. I've owned 3 of the types on various boats. I had an Aries on my Elizabethan 31, a wind pilot on my 39-foot Golden Hind, and a hydrovane on my Moody 36. Because so much of my time sailing has been single-handing, I've also had an electric autopilot of some sort on every one of the 8 boats I've owned. In my price comparison table, I've added UK VAT prices onto all the prices which are current today in late 2024. When you buy an EU or American product, they ship it locally, VAT-free, around 20%, but you pay 20% VAT on arrival in the UK. So it comes to almost the same thing. So the UK price is roughly the same as the European Union price. Shipping is going to cost you an additional £200 to £400. For UK buyers, one way of saving on the 20% VAT is to have your new Windvane shipped to Guernsey in the Channel Islands, and then you sail there and collect it VAT-free. You can have it installed by one of the boat yards in or around St. Peter Port. The very first Windvane I had was an older, original Aries type. The very latest models these days cost €7,700, about £6,500, plus delivery. I found my Aries very strongly built, but a bit insensitive. A heavy-duty workhorse that would go on forever, but not so good with light winds from astern, as the vane is so heavy and relatively small. There are kits to update older models if you can find a second-hand one. The Windpilot is an excellent, modern, highly efficient piece of kit. The design allows you to fold the rudder up easily when in port, and it links with very short lines to the wheel or tiller. It comes in various sizes and types depending on the size of the boat. Its clever folding up system when you're in port or anchor makes it very user-friendly. They're built strongly and they function well. I sailed several thousand miles with mine, and it was efficient and reliable. The only problem I ever had was some of the exotic plastic bearings became swollen and needed replacing. Lots of boats have circumnavigated with a Windpilot. There's an option to turn the rudder into a steering rudder if your main one fails, and for boats up to 60 foot, it's around £3,000 plus shipping costs. For boats up to 27 foot, they have a model costing £1,650. Neptune Windvane are a UK company, and they claim you can motor sail with their system if there's more than 5 knots of wind over the deck. They appear to be robustly built and efficient. They come in various sizes for different sized boats. For a 23-foot boat it's £2,000, and a 31-foot boat it's £2,300, and a 40-foot boat it's £2,600, and a 50,000-foot boat £3,000. As they're UK based, the shipping cost should be much less, and I assume you could just drive over to Chertsey and collect it. The Monitor Windvane by Scanmar are a USA company, and the Monitor, like the Aries, has been around forever. They recently have created a very clever swing gate system which allows you access to the scoop or swimming platform on the stern of your boat. In the case of main rudder failure, the Monitor rudder can also be used to steer the boat. The wind steering system comes in at $5,500 or around 4,200 UK pounds. If you're non-US based, you could have them shipped to Guernsey, but there will be the shipping costs to add on. Seafeather is another small independent Windvane company who make the fittings bespoke for your boat. Their price is £2,499. Their shipping costs for the UK are of course very reasonable, and you could possibly just drive to their place in Shrewsbury to collect. A lot of Jester Challenge boats have Seafeather, as does Paul on his boat Serenity, and there are details of it on his YouTube channel very nearly about sailing, which is well worth subscribing to. He has an excellent video about his Seafeather on it and how easily he got it working the very first time. And finally, there is Hydrovane. Originally a UK company, but now owned by a Canadian family, but I think it still ships out of the UK. Having sailed some 35,000 miles around the world with one, I naturally think it's the bee's knees. the best of the bunch in all respects except price. A couple of years ago, they quoted me £6,000 plus shipping for one suitable for my boat. It was when I was intending relocating my boat from the English Channel to the Caribbean, and it was partly this cost, this rather high cost, that made me decide to put my Beneteau 323 on a ship rather than sail her down to the Canaries across the Atlantic myself. This is the video. So to sum up, many models of Windvanes have facilities to use their little rudder to steer the boat if the main rudder fails. They mainly have a simple way of getting this rudder in and out of the water when you're in port or marina. None of them will work with no wind, and when motor sailing, their capabilities are either poor or non-existent. I've never done this, but I suspect it only works in moderate conditions when you add the Autopilot to them. In this year of 2024, I'm coming to the conclusion that if you have a larger boat, 40 foot or upwards, and you fit a diesel generator, install a high quality electric or possibly hydraulic powerful ram type autopilot, then for an Atlantic crossing, an electric autopilot is the way to go. The generator would also power air conditioning and dispense with the need for solar panels and wind generators. In the UK, you can buy a silenced marine diesel generator for around £7,000. For crossing the Pacific Ocean, which is a much bigger proposition than the Atlantic, I'm not quite so sure. Personally, I'd like a Windvane unless I had a big crew. For the most part, sailboats operating short-handed are going to need an electric autopilot for day sailing or just to hold the boat into the wind while you're setting the sails, in addition to their Windvane. For tiller-steered boats, there are a couple of manufacturers of tiller pilots, and their prices are, and these are ex-marine superstore. For a Simrad up to 32 foot boat, £389.95. For a Simrad up to 34 foot tiller-steered boat, £499.95. Raymarine ST1000 is going to cost £469.95. A Raymarine ST2000 is going to cost £479.95. Personally, I'd go with Simrad top of the range, as I have more faith in that company, and for 20 quid it's worth getting the best. For wheel-steered boats, the answer is to have an autopilot where the ram is fitted to the quadrant and the controls are a panel in the cockpit, frequently connected to the rest of the navigation system. Sometimes the ram is powered by electric motor and sometimes by hydraulics if that's how your boat's steered. There's an amazing amount of choices available. A Garmin Evolution Autopilot is £2,735. Garmin Reactor 40 Autopilot System, £325. Brooks and Gatehouse system is about £3,600, and the Navico system is around £2,800. There are some boats like mine where that are wheel steered but need an autopilot in the cockpit fastened to the wheel. As far as I know, there's only two on the market, and that's the bespoke American CPT, which costs around £1,640, and we're shipping to the UK a total of £1,900. Raymarine Evolution wheel pilot that I mentioned earlier, and that costs around £1,500. It really is only suitable for local sailing in good conditions. It's not a brilliant piece of kit, and is certainly not man enough for an Atlantic crossing. The prices I've mentioned are, of course, not spot on, as so much depends on exchange rates and what deals various companies and chandlers are doing. Anyway, complicated subject. I hope I haven't made it more complicated, and I hope it's been a bit helpful. Fair winds. Bye. My library of digital sailing books is at gentlesailing.com, so you can buy them as instant downloads. There's a link to a printer who can convert them to hard copy if that's what you prefer. I've just totally updated and republished French Canal Routes to the Mediterranean, which is now in its 12th edition and is fully up to date with new information, charts and pictures. Recently I published Your Boat in the Sun, which proved an instant popular success. It's about where to keep your boat in the Mediterranean or the Caribbean and the costs and the logistics involved. The Atlantic Crossing Guide has become a bestseller, and it outsells most of the others, probably because it's arguably one of the most comprehensive guides to sailing to the Caribbean that's available. The Gentle Sailing Route to the Mediterranean is one of the most popular publications that I have. It describes how to coast hop all the way to Gibraltar without having to spend a night at sea. There are books about marinas in the Med, sailing in the Caribbean islands, as well as a book on simple navigation, and even a Pacific Ocean crossing guide, and a book about just living aboard a sailing boat. Anyway, it's all at gentlesailing.com. So please do pay the site a visit and browse through my publications if you have a moment. Thanks. Fair winds.